Join me on my journey to health, happiness, and stability. If you have some family members or friends that sometimes strike you as odd, I'm hoping by the end of this video that you will have a better understanding of why they might be the way they are and what you can do to help. As a disclaimer, I would like to say that I am not a trained therapist or a counselor. I have no degrees in anything psychology. I've just spent a lot of time studying psychology. It's nice to be with you all tonight, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what it is to be a highly sensitive person, and then we're going to have an added layer of some of the things that go on with a person that's experienced trauma or has PTSD. A highly sensitive person is generally very empathic. It hurts them or makes them feel sad if they watch the news and they see that something bad's happened. A lot of times, if you're talking about something that's happened in the news or something that's rather traumatic, or you have traumatic pictures from wars or any given thing that may go on, they can really be sensitive to seeing things that are sad or hurtful or violence. So they'll often, if you say, try to show them something on your phone or try to get them to come in and watch something on TV, they'll say, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. And you should respect that, because their sense of empathy is kind of out the roof sometimes. Another thing about the highly sensitive person is they need a lot of time for reflection. They may spend what seems to you like a huge amount of time wanting to be alone, wanting to be in thought, kind of avoidant or being somewhat reclusive. And it's usually because they are mulling around in their head something that they've experienced or witnessed, and they just don't quite have a grip on what's happened. It can take me a very long time to process something that I've been through. As a matter of fact, there are some things that happened to me while I was really young that I still haven't fully processed. But they will need that extra time to reflect on things and process things. While it can be frustrating when they vacate your presence or just disappear from the family table, it's good to respect that time that they need alone. I mean, you can offer kind words and say, is there anything I can do to help? Take them a nice drink, or treat them, in a way where they know that you understand that they need this time away. While a highly sensitive person needs this extra time to process and to reflect, oftentimes before they've had a chance to pull it together in their head, they may take things personally and get their feelings hurt. I know my dad was highly sensitive, and he could get his feelings hurt really bad. And sometimes, if they're not good at processing through these things and reflecting and actually getting an idea in their head what actually happened, they can take a very long time to process things that have occurred, and they may feel very hurt, like you pointed them out, or you criticized them, or you think poorly of them, or you think that they are bad in some way. And this just drives them further and further away. And you can tell them, no, I was having a bad day, or no, I misunderstood what you said, or something like that. But until they process through the given situation, they're going to be hiding from you or from the situation, from whoever or whatever it was that caused them to get their feelings hurt. This is something that's to be expected and respected, because they can't help that they are a neurodivergent thinker. They can't help that it's difficult for them to process certain experiences. Another really strong reaction that highly sensitive people can have is their senses, like their sense of smell, their sense of sight, touch, everything. They can have a lot stronger senses. This would be called hypersensitivity. But even if they don't display some of these other things very strong, because it's going to give and take with the individual, they can avoid being touched. They can have a really strong reaction to bright lights in their eyes. They actually get sick, throw up at a bad smell or telling them something. Their senses are just really heightened. And sometimes to calm down from these situations, they will need to go into a room, maybe a dark room, and just calm themselves. Imagine that if every time you experience something like somebody flipping a light on or whatever, you were just shocked. It just really physically hurt you. It takes some understanding of what they're going through and having empathy for them as well. Highly sensitive people often will avoid interacting socially. But if they are strong enough and they get out and say you go shopping or you go to a get together or something, even if they get through it fine, they're going to be incredibly fatigued when they get home. It just saps the strength out of you trying to be hyper vigilant, which you can't help. It just wears you out feeling like you're the oddball or pins and needles. You're trying to be perfect. You're trying not to be embarrassing. You're trying not to be the odd one out. But just being out, even if you go shopping and you don't talk to anyone, just being out in the public, it's like it just drains your battery. So something like going shopping for an hour or two can literally, you come home, you could sleep for 3 hours. It seems extreme, but it's because all of their senses are supercharged during that time. They're hypervigilant. They're paying attention to everything, and they're just putting all of their energies into trying to do whatever it is that they're doing so that when they go home, they are completely and utterly exhausted. And if you live with a hypersensitive person or you're in a relationship with them, hopefully you knew all these things were going to happen, before you married or got into a deep relationship. It does take a lot of understanding. It takes being able to cope with some of their needs and their behaviors. If you are a neurotypical person and you're in a relationship or a friendship or whatever it is with one of these highly sensitive people and you're watching them, you may just think that they're just nutso or completely odd or eccentric or overreacting. A lot of people think, no, this is real. And if you're neurotypical, you need to do in-depth studies to understand how that you can assist and help a highly sensitive person, especially if you truly love them. You're going to seek out what is going to make their life more comfortable, and ultimately it will make your life more comfortable as well if you understand them. A lot of times a highly sensitive person will startle easy. They may really, really feel uncomfortable about you walking up behind them or standing behind them. They may jump or just hit the dust when they have a loud sound, or anything that could cause a jump start. Often they will be strongly affected by that. That is their nervous system. They can't help that. And also they will be sometimes subject to phobias. Now, a phobia is a fear that is unfounded or it's not real. If they have a phobia, it's just like before, they need to process that. And you might initiate it by saying something like, I know that you feel really, really uncomfortable with this, but I would like you to try to process it and see if you can't overcome this, because there's truly, truly no danger. Don't insult them or make them feel ridiculous. Allow them, you can bring it to their attention, but you're going to have to allow them to personally process this phobia. So if they're afraid of the dark, or say they're afraid of a person and they feel really, really uncomfortable around a particular person, it could be any number of a million things. If they have a phobia, they are going to have to process it. And until they do, it's just as well to protect them from that. Because if you say, oh, you're being silly, you're being ridiculous, come on, and you just drag them out the door or whatever like that, they are going to be traumatized. And it may last for a lifetime. Patience is the key. Now, a person that's highly sensitive, this kind of goes along with the phobias, but often they will be subject to false realities. They may have had something happen to them as a child and they blame one person, which it's actually another person that caused it. Or they may say, for instance, there's a place that they just can't go to, a particular store, a particular restaurant. They just always refuse to go to that restaurant. They think, I don't like that restaurant. I don't like the food. I don't like the people that go there. I feel really comfortable there. I don't like that restaurant. But what it may be instead, that is the reality that they have in their mind. But ultimately, they may have some sort of false reality, and actually they don't like the restaurant because, say, it's a restaurant that they keep the lights down low, and at some point as a child they had to eat a dinner because the electricity was out. They had to eat a dinner in the dark or in semi-darkness, and they were terrified the whole time. It's really important, if you're a highly sensitive person, to analyze things that you are extremely afraid of. Find out if it's a phobia, if it's a false memory, something that you're thinking one way is the reality, and actually there is something quite different that's caused the problem. So now I'm going to move on to people that have suffered trauma. And often we think of trauma as someone being beaten, or a child being screamed at or neglected or abused, and it can be those things. But it can also be very subtle things that has caused them to be traumatized and to have PTSD. And this especially comes into play when the child was highly sensitive in the beginning, or was a neurodivergent thinker, or had confusion. Because oftentimes, especially like with ADHD and different things that can accompany this, a child may, and actually through your entire life, you may be picked out as somebody to avoid because you're bothersome, you're burdensome, you have too many needs, you're the needy one. And all of this can be overcome because there is a certain amount of compensation that happens that makes you an incredibly formidable, strong person. And usually people that are highly sensitive or have PTSD are incredibly resilient. They bounce back. Not always fast, but they will come back. A person that's had trauma, or they have PTSD, they may have shock, disbelief, they may be in denial, they may suffer from phobias and jump starting and a lot of things that can happen to them. They have trouble concentrating a lot of times, focusing, they have trouble processing any given situation, and they're a lot like the highly sensitive person. But what can be truly devastating is if they are a highly sensitive person to begin with, and then they're faced with trauma. It can be a lifelong battle, and I am a testament to that. A lifelong battle overcoming the myriad of issues. They may suffer Stockholm syndrome. They may suffer from flashbacks. They may have sudden outbursts, and in some cases even show a form of violence, because really on the inside they're incredibly vulnerable and afraid. And while a person that has reached that level needs to be carefully monitored, maybe needs to be on medication, should always be in therapy, most people with PTSD have a much milder form. Okay, there is anger, instability, inability to negate certain emotions. Now, if a person has PTSD and there was actually some sort of trauma to the brain, or they had pre-existing issues in the brain, autism, another disability that's similar, or if they have been beaten in the head. These mood swings can actually be the brain's process of dealing with things that they simply cannot process. And in those situations, I suggest that you go to a trained professional, ideally a psychiatrist, and have a DNA test done that can suit you perfectly to some sort of medication to give you a mood stabilizer, an antidepressant. But now it's not hit and miss. You can actually go and have a cheek swab and have a DNA test, and they can match you. There's like certain tiers, but they can match you very closely to what medications are going to work best for you. And then there's some come and go with dosage. Do you want, just like the one pill, or do you need some extended release? But if there is brain damage involved, especially in the frontal cortex, it could possibly be something that definitely needs to have medication to assist with that. Some other words that come to mind are anxiety, fear, shame, guilt, self-denial, or self-hate. Depending on what level these go through, there can be a certain amount of danger towards self-harm. Things like cutting. On the lower end of the spectrum, and this is kind of what I'm dealing with at the time, you have people that are understimulated sometimes. If a person through neglect as a child is not emotionally stable in some way, or they're not properly coddled, touched, bonded with, they can have a lack of sensory. And that was kind of my situation. So there are times that I literally crave to be touched. And unfortunately, I have been raised around and lived with a lot of people that were either avoidant or touch me not, so they didn't want to touch. It wasn't really a form of self-harm. But I have taken a soft brush and rubbed my skin. I have heard that you don't want to do that on the abdomen or highly sensitive areas, but you can just rub the skin and it will actually calm down the sensory issues that you may be experiencing. While there's a lot of terms, and I don't like labels, but there's a lot of personality disorders, and then there's the attachment styles. A person that has a particular attachment style may come across as being incredibly needy. They're insecure. They're terrified of abandonment, and they may chase after other people because they feel so incredibly insecure. If they're mixed with somebody that's an avoidant attachment style, it just exasperates the situation because the avoidant is running away from the needy person. And neither one is correct or bad. I think the problem comes because there's just a misunderstanding of what's going on. So say you have two siblings and one is avoidant and is hyper-vigilant and hypersensitized and just needs to be alone to process because they are a highly sensitive person, and you have another sibling that is just needing, and they so badly need to feel acceptance and to have somebody relieve their fears of abandonment, and one is just chasing the other one, and it just exasperates the situation because the avoidant is feeling like he's going to smother, and the needy person feels like that he's going to die because no one loves him. So being educated and understanding, especially as a parent, if you see this going on, every child needs to be validated in the way that makes them feel most comfortable. Also, a highly sensitive person and or a person with PTSD. And a lot of times these overlap. It's really, really, really easy for a highly sensitive person to be traumatized. And parents don't know, they don't understand. I can tell you a story. I was a small child and my family every year went to the river to watch fireworks. And I was terrified of big trees because of watching Snow White, and how the trees came down and tried to grab at her, and I was terrified of big trees, or I thought they were going to fall on me. I had this phobia that they were going to fall on me. And I also was incredibly traumatized by loud noises. So my mother, being the mother that she was, wanted to get me out there and so I could see the fireworks. And the first thing she would do is find the biggest tree she could and put a quilt on the ground so we could sit on the ground. It would be after dark. I'm sitting there with my hands over my ears, and I have my eyes closed, and occasionally I open my eyes so that I can see the bright colors. It was so traumatizing for me as a child, and I'm sure my mother didn't have any idea what I was going through. Another thing that can come up, and they're completely and totally unaware of it, they can become aware. It's so important to be, if you're having any of these issues, to become self-aware. But one of the issues that can come up with both a highly sensitive person and a person with PTSD is they can come across or be somewhat self-centered. They're so wrapped up in their pain, their suffering, their traumatization, or, being highly sensitive is really painful. But they can be so wrapped up in that they're lacking the awareness to see where other people have pain. And say, for instance, a child has been shamed for eating. Say they're overweight and they're shamed for eating, and they get out somewhere where there's plenty of food, and they may just fill their plate full or take too much food where other people can't eat or something like that, because their body, their mental psychosis has essentially taught them that if you're going to eat, you've got to eat while you can. If you see odd behaviors in people that make them seem like that they're greedy or they're just very self-centered about their emotions, they hurt other people's feelings, and this can happen, and it does happen, trust me, I know from experience. I suffer from abandonment issues, not feeling loved. If I think, especially if it's someone I personally love, and because at times especially through different times of my life, I acted out, I was hard for them to understand, or I just was having a bad day. Sometimes it's just a one-off situation and I had a bad day. But because of that, I have certain people that have never spoken to me again, people that I love near and dear, they're family, they're close to me. Or a bad season. Sometimes you have a bad year, or if you have a compounding illness that makes what you have already going on up here worse. And honestly, I was a little bit erratic in last night's video. It wasn't I fell off the wagon or anything, but I was just frustrated about a few things. Kind of let it out in the video, so if you watch that and you think, boy, she's a little on the odd side tonight. Yeah, I was going through a hard time, and I processed through it all this morning, and the name of it was Going Rogue, and I'm off that kick now, and I am going to get back on a more stable path. But it was kind of fun to make. It was just a little bit of an artistic venture as well. So if you want to go watch that video, you're going to know what I'm talking about, because I can go from being this to being what you see tonight. But to be quite honest about it, a person that is highly sensitive, neurotypical people, they're probably better off with their own kind if there's a sense of understanding and compassion among everybody there. They need autonomy. They need independence. If they're capable of being independent and on their own, they need to be in a situation where they're not having to have anybody tell them what to do or tell them how to live, because they are already in a heightened state of feeling low and depressed, and they don't take criticism well. And they do so much better if they have this inordinate amount of time to process things so they can reconstruct their own realities. Most of them are incredibly smart, and they have the ability to process all of this crazy stuff that's going on around them, but they do have to have the time. They have to have the space, and sometimes this can take months, and it can be very, very painful. One of the hardest things that I have seen is a neurotypical mother that has a neurodivergent child, and all through their life they're just criticized. There's a lot of different scenarios that this can happen in, but the neurodivergent child just grows up with all this trauma of thinking that they're the broken one, they're the bad one, because the neurotypical mother just doesn't have the patience and she just can't understand. There's a lot of other things, time alone, time to process. Sometimes you need a dark room. Sometimes you just need a lot of extra sleep or a lot of extra rest. But whatever you have to do to calm these feelings of stress and overwhelm and confusion, false realities or phobias, or whatever you have to do to get these things calmed down, that's the environment that you need to seek. We try to keep a very quiet home, a very low-key home, and we all have coping mechanisms in place. We all have our own space so that we can do that, or we switch out spaces so that we can all do that. It's just very, very technical sometimes running a household, especially if you have multiple people that are neurodivergent. But there is a reality for them that is very peaceful and very happy, and usually it involves a wholesome, creative, kind environment. The biggest mistake that can be made is, especially among young men, is if they don't have a chance to process through these things and they are expected to meet that quota of manhood, which I think some of the grandest men that I've ever known were both neurodivergent and could cry easily and were sensitive, and that's my father. I think my father was one of the grandest people I've ever met. He was sensitive and he was neurodivergent, and he could get his feelings hurt really, really easy. Knowing these things going forward, you might recognize some of these things in your children or some of your family or whatever, but I really, really suggest that you study more into this. There are trained therapists all over YouTube, and I am really, really happy that personality disorders and all of these different things that people suffer through now you can educate yourself on them and you can learn about them. This has been a little bit of a long video. I want to thank you for listening if you've reached it to this point. And like, subscribe, and comment down below. And remember that I am a work in process. I am headed towards health, happiness, and financial freedom. And it is a work in process. And I have simply just been healed from multiple things to the point that I can handle this. Try not to be too judgmental, and try to go with me on this journey and just see where I go, because I think I have a pretty good plan and I have tools and coping skills in place to help me do this, but I'm not always going to be right on point, and there are times that I'm going to be a little dysregulated, and there's going to be weeks that I am facing something that's very traumatic to me or for something, and I may be a little off my game. But it is a journey, and I'm asking you to join me. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next video.